A confirmed case of equine herpesvirus type 1, or EHV-1, at HITS Culpeper has once again brought attention to one of the most significant infectious disease risks in the horse industry. The situation began with a single horse. However, the consequences have extended beyond that initial case. Dozens of horses are exposed. A barn was placed under quarantine, and movement restrictions were implemented under veterinary authority. One horse has been lost. This type of event is not rare. It reflects a persistent vulnerability in environments where horses are transported, housed in close proximity, and exposed to new populations. To fully understand the significance of this, it is necessary to examine how EHV-1 functions at a biological level, how it spreads in real-world conditions, and why even well-established biosecurity systems can fail when they are not applied consistently. Equine herpesvirus type 1 is a double-stranded DNA virus belonging to the herpes family. Like other herpes viruses, it has the ability to establish lifelong infection within its host. After a horse is exposed to the virus, it enters the body through the respiratory tract. The virus initially infects epithelial cells that line the upper airways, including the nasal passages. This stage is known as the primary infection. During this phase, the virus replicates locally within these cells. This replication leads to the shedding of viral particles in respiratory secretions, which allows the virus to spread to other horses. Following this initial replication, the virus enters nearby lymphatic tissue and white blood cells. This allows it to gain access to the bloodstream in a process known as viremia. Viremia is a critical stage in the progression of the disease. Once the virus is circulating in the blood, it can travel throughout the body and infect different tissues. At this point, the virus has the potential to infect endothelial cells, which are the cells that line the interior of blood vessels. This is where the most serious complications begin. When EHV-1 infects endothelial cells, it causes inflammation and damage to the blood vessels. This can lead to clot formation and reduction of blood flow. If this damage occurs in the uterus of a pregnant mare, it can result in abortion. If it occurs in the central nervous system, particularly in the blood vessels supplying the spinal cord and brain, it leads to neurological form of the disease known as equine herpes encephalopathy, or EHM. In addition to this active phase of infection, EHV-1 has the ability to enter a latent state. During latency, the virus is not actively replicating. Instead, it resides within nerve tissue, particularly in structures such as the trigeminal ganglia and certain lymphoid tissues. In this state, the virus cannot be detected through standard testing and does not produce clinical signs. However, it remains within the horse for life. Under certain conditions, the virus can reactivate. Stress is one of the most significant triggers for reactivation. This includes transportation, competition, changes in environment, illness, or other physiological stressors. When reactivation occurs, the virus begins replicating again and can be shed, allowing it to spread to other horses. This ability to remain latent and then reactivate is one of the primary reasons EHV-1 is so difficult to control at a population level. The clinical presentation of EHV-1 varies depending on the form of the disease and the stage of infection. The earliest and most consistent clinical sign is fever. Even a mild increase in temperature, typically above 101.5 degrees Fahrenheit, can indicate infection. This stage is often overlooked, particularly in environments where routine temperature monitoring is not performed consistently. Some horses may develop mild respiratory signs, including nasal discharge or coughing. These symptoms can resemble less serious respiratory infections and may not immediately raise concern. However, in cases where the virus progresses to the neurological form, more severe signs begin to develop. Neurological symptoms are caused by disruption of blood flow to the central nervous system due to damaged blood vessels. These signs include ataxia, which is a lack of coordination as well as weakness, particularly in the hind limbs. Horses may also show reduced tail tone, difficult urinating, or urinary incontinence. In more advanced cases, horses may become recumbent and unable to stand. The progression of neurological symptoms can be rapid. In some cases, deterioration occurs within 1 to 2 days after the onset of neurological signs. The prognosis varies depending on the severity of the damage. Some horses recover fully or partially, while others may experience permanent deficits or require euthanasia. EHV-1 spreads primarily through respiratory secretions. When an infected horse exhales, coughs, or snorts, viral particles are released into the surrounding environment. Other horses can become infected by inhaling these particles. Direct contact between horses increases the likelihood of transmission. However, indirect transmission is also a significant factor. The virus can be transferred through contaminated equipment, including water buckets, feed tubs, grooming tools, and tack. It can also be carried on human hands, clothing, and footwear. Although the virus does not survive indefinitely outside the host, it can remain viable on surfaces long enough to facilitate transmission, particularly in cool and moist conditions. One of the most challenging aspects of EHV-1 control is that horses can shed the virus before showing obvious clinical signs. This means that by the time a case is identified, exposure may have already occurred. High-density environments such as horse shows and boarding facilities present increased risks due to the number of horses in close proximity and the frequency of movement between locations. Effective biosecurity requires a structured and consistent approach. The most important tool for early detection is routine temperature monitoring. Each horse should have its temperature taken at least twice daily. This allows for the identification of fever before other clinical signs develop. Any horse with an elevated temperature should be isolated immediately. Isolation should involve physical separation from other horses, ideally in a designated quarantine or isolation area. This area should have separate equipment and limited access. Equipment management is essential. Each horse should have its own water bucket, feed tub, and grooming tools. Shared equipment should be avoided or thoroughly disinfected between uses. Hand hygiene is critical. Individuals handling horses should wash their hands or use an appropriate disinfectant between contacts with different horses. Gloves may be used in high-risk situations, but they must be changed between horses to be effective. Clothing and footwear should also be managed carefully. Boots should be disinfected when moving between barns, and clothing that has been in contact with one group of horses should not be used around another without washing. Movement control is another key component of biosecurity. Limiting unnecessary movement of horses reduces the risk of introducing or spreading infection. During a suspected or confirmed case, strict movement restrictions should be implemented. This includes halting arrivals and departures and restricting access to essential personnel. Environmental cleaning and disinfection should be performed regularly. Surfaces, stall doors, and shared areas should be cleaned using disinfectants that are effective against viruses. Finally, communication is essential. All individuals involved in the care and management of horses must be aware of biosecurity protocols and understand their importance. Consistency is the determining factor in whether these measures are effective. The protocols required to manage EHV-1 are well established. However, outbreaks continue to occur. This is often due to inconsistency in implementation rather than a lack of knowledge. Routine temperature checks may be skipped. Early signs may not be recognized immediately. Equipment may be shared without proper disinfection. In high-traffic environments, even small lapses can allow the virus to spread. By the time a case is confirmed, exposure may have already occurred. EHV-1 remains a persistent and unavoidable risk within the horse industry. The virus cannot be eliminated, but its impact can be reduced through consistent and disciplined biosecurity practices. The situation at HITS Culpeper demonstrates how quickly a single case can escalate. Prevention depends not on awareness alone, but on daily action.